Hey guys, normally I have something funny at the beginning of these videos, and because of the climate that we're in right now, I just think it'd be good to have a conversation with you. How does the Bible call us to react in these situations? That's a tough question, and I'm not going to pretend like I have every answer, but I do know that I follow a God who has every answer and knows the correct way to navigate every season. And so I'm just gonna lean on him and look to what the scripture says of how we should treat one another. We know that the Bible and faith in Jesus is for everybody. Everybody is welcomed. We see this in the book of Revelation when they're talking about what heaven looks like. This is how John describes it. There before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And we see in the book of Acts, again, faith is not just for the Jews anymore. It's for everybody. Everybody's called to it. And so as believers, we need to believe that. And the greatest commandment that we see throughout Scripture, over and over and over again, it is drilled into us, is to love one another. And so if we take those two verses and we take love, we know we're called to love everybody. That's the greatest commandment. Let me read some verses for you. John 14:34. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. 1 John 4:20 says this, if anyone says I love God, but I hate my brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God whom he has not seen. 1 John 4:11 says this, beloved, if God so loved us, we ought to love one another. John 15:12 says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And so in verses like 1 Corinthians 12, we find passages that talk about what happens when a part of the body or believers is hurting. It says this, even so, the body is not made up of one part, but many. It's made up of many different tribes and nations and all that. It says this, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. So God paints this picture throughout Scripture that we as believers should love one another and take care of one another. And that's the greatest commandment, love God and love people. And anything outside of that is outside of the will of God. It's what God designed us for. And it's sinful. And so in this season, guys, I really encourage you, love your neighbor as yourself. Love them unconditionally. And watch the wounds heal. I love you guys, and let's jump into the sermon now. The girls just took a bath in here. Week 12 and 13. I know it was kind of confusing because I spoke last week on Sunday, so there was no video last week. So this week is week 12 and 13. Hope that's okay with you guys. Welcome to my bathtub. Don't worry. There's no water in here. And I am wearing clothes. So don't worry about that. I am wearing clothes. I want to read something to you guys that I read in Matthew that blows my brain. It blows my mind. Are you ready for this? This is Matthew 28:16-17. Now this is after Jesus had already died and resurrected. It says, now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him. But some doubted. Like, they had just spent 3 years following Jesus. 3 years of their life, watching him perform miracle after miracle. Bam, shaboom, shabang, right? Jesus was on fire. They watched him for 3 years. And then they have this moment where Jesus is like, hey, I'm going to die. And then I'm going to come back. And I'm going to be resurrected. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to do some things. And then I'm going to be ascended up into heaven. Throughout Jesus' life, right? Cool, man. Sounds good. Sounds like a good plan. And then Jesus does it, and he comes back, and he's talking to them. He's talking to the 11 men which he discipled for the past 3 years. And it says that some of them worshiped him, but others doubted. How do you doubt? What are you doubting at this point? It's unbelievable. It's easy to sit here with our Bibles and look at that text and say to ourselves, how? Why would that even be a thought to you, right? Whoa, not so fast, okay? Come on, let's pump the brakes a little bit. back it up here for a minute because we need to address that. This belief is something that we are going to battle our entire lives. You may even find yourself in seasons of your relationship with Jesus where you're like, I'm having a hard time believing this. There's even a parable about this in Luke 16. And it's a really fun one because there's this lovely scene in which this man goes to hell. I know, right? And he's in hell, and there's this cavern between him and heaven. And on the other side of the cavern is Abraham. And basically the man says, is there any way I can get over there? Or at least could you give me a drink of water? And Abraham's like, sorry, bro, that's not how it works in this place. Like, I can't. Remember, this is a parable. This isn't an actual story. And then the man looks at Abraham and he goes, can you send somebody to the earth to warn my family about this? Because I don't want them to be in this place. And then Abraham says this, unless they hear from Moses or the prophets themselves, none of your family will be convinced, even if someone should rise from the dead. What it basically means is if our minds are already made up, it's impossible to change them unless something just short of miraculous happens. I saw a quote that said this, it's easy to sneer at the disciples' doubt while ignoring the reality of our own. The truth is this, guys, sometimes we look at the disciples and we look at that story, we say, how would you doubt? But we ignore the doubt that we have within our own hearts. Like the man in that parable that we talked about, we think maybe if the evidence was just there, then we would believe. But we can actually learn a lesson from the disciples. There is no amount of evidence that exists anywhere on earth or in heaven that'll make us believe, even if the evidence is really, really solid. At the end of Jesus' ministry on earth, he dealt with this directly. I mean, the disciples were straight up doubting him after watching him bring Lazarus back from the dead. The truth is that unbelief is something that you as a believer and me as a believer are going to have to battle against every single day of our faith. But how do we battle unbelief? That's a great question as a believer, and it's something that the earlier you can learn it, the better. So the first and foremost is, I just want to make this very clear. If you want to battle unbelief in your life, if you're struggling to even believe in your faith or in God, the first thing that you can do is don't be afraid to ask questions. For some reason, our faith is something where it's like, it's embarrassing to not know the answer. But we don't approach anything else like this. Like, imagine if we just like one day woke up and we're like, I know how to drive. Like, that would be a horrible thing. That's a scary thought. And so in our faith, for some reason, there's this thing where it's like, you should be embarrassed if you don't know every answer to the scriptures, right? Stop. You don't need to do that, okay? It's okay. Ask your pastor, ask your leader, ask your cat. If he knows a lot about the Bible, ask him. It'll be great. It'll be a good conversation. The second one is this. The Bible has been tried and tested. There was no portion of Jesus' life that was private. Like, none of it. Jesus lived a very public life. It wasn't like he performed miracles only with his disciples or only with his friends or only with the Jews. No, he did everything publicly. He lived a public life. He performed public miracles. He had a public death, and he had a public ascension from that death. Did you know how many people he talked to after he had already died and came back? Hundreds. I mean, it's amazing. If people could have disproved it by now, it would have been disproven. But it hasn't. And so there's comfort in that. But still, that doesn't quite answer the question. As I said earlier in my message, evidence alone can't be the thing that you rest on. I think that the most important thing that you can do is the third thing. And it's, don't look for just answers, but look at the relationship that you have with God. I know personally, I can't tell you how many times I just wanted to doubt and just be like, you know what? Like, really? He walked on water? Really? Like, Jonah got swallowed by a big fish? Really? Like, a donkey spoke truth? And in those moments of like, I just want to, I don't know about this. I don't know if I'm going to keep believing. I also have the moments in which God worked directly with me. I remember the amazing moments at Snow Blast where I felt like he spoke to me, or where I felt like someone prayed over me, and it was just experiences with God. And if you've had an experience with God, reflect on that and let that be the thing that you look to. I'm now editing this video, and I completely forgot to say if you've never had an experience with God, I encourage you to pursue one. That means go to a Bible study, go to a worship set, come to a camp, and then you'll kind of have that pillar to hold on to in your faith once you engage in that. And so that's all I got to say. Back to the video. I love you guys, and I hope that this encouraged somebody out there. I'll see you next week.